bonjour. En quelle langue?
On voit pas un petit mieux la salle d'habitude.
Konnichiwa. Konnichiwa. Genki desu.
Ça va essayer quand il y a de la presse japonaise.
Je connais du Japon. Elle m'a offert un coussin au Japon. Genki desu.
Ah, c'est pour toi, Léa. C'est coussin belge.
Merci, ça va.
On va la chanter.
J'apprécie. C'est gentil.
Merci beaucoup,
Déjà,
photographe. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, photographers.
Et bienvenue à la conférence
Welcome
de
to
presse
the press
de
conference
Saint-Laurent de
on
Bertrand Bonello.
Saint-Laurent by Bertrand Bonello.
Alors, je vais vous présenter
I would like now
cette
to
longue et belle
introduce
table en partant de
the
tout au bout
people
du
at this
tableau.
long table, starting with the far end. The producers,
Nicolas Altmaier et Eric
Nicolas Altmaier
oui, oui,
and
ils sont
Eric
frères.
Altmaier. Yes, indeed, they are brothers.
À côté, oui, à côté d'eux,
Next to them,
pour ses débuts au cinéma, dans un rôle qu'elle
starting
connaît
in
bien,
the cinema,
la vedette,
in
Aymeline
a
Valade.
part she knows well, Aymeline Valade.
À côté d'elle,
Next to
le
her,
fils de cinéma des frères Dardenne,
the
déjà
Dardenne brothers'
réincarné en Claude François
cinema
Locoplo,
son,
aujourd'hui
who is now
réincarné en Pierre Berger,
being
Jérémie
reincarnated as Pierre Berger, Jérémie Renier.
Je vais passer en continuant avec les
We'll
dames,
continue with the
avec la
ladies.
si chic loulou de la falaise, Léa
The
Seydoux,
very chic Loulou de la Falaise, Léa Seydoux,
avec l'indispensable
the indispensable
Madame Munoz,
Mrs.
Amira
Munoz, Amira Casar.
Casar. À côté de moi, j'ai
Next to me,
le coproducteur,
I have the co-producer, Christophe Lambert,
le co-scénariste,
the scriptwriter, Thomas Bidguin.
au centre de la table,
In the
vous
middle
l'aurez
of the
reconnu,
table, you will have
Yves Saint-Laurent
recognized him,
lui-même,
Yves Saint Laurent
Gaspard
himself,
Ulliel.
Gaspard Ulliel.
Et puis après la Polonide, après
And
ces souvenirs de la
after
Maison Close,
the Polonide,
la mémoire d'une
the House
grande
of
maison de culture,
Tolerance,
le réalisateur Bertrand
the
Bonello.
director, Bertrand Bonello.
À qui je vais poser la première question?
Who should I ask the first question to? You would no doubt have asked this question too. There was the two Garde des Boutons, two Chanels, and now we have two films on Yves Saint Laurent. I'd like to ask Bertrand Bonello what the chronological link was with Yves Saint Laurent. You're quite right to ask this question, Daniel. I can't compare. I haven't seen the other film. I tried to focus on my own project, and I worried as little as possible about these ups and downs in terms of chronology, the subject. Perhaps the producers will talk about this, the economic situation too, because there are now two films on the same topic on the market. So I just tried to focus on my own film, and I hope that that's what we'll talk about today.
Helen Rowe from Agence France Presse. Can you tell us why you decided to concentrate on this darkest, more troubled side of Yves Saint Laurent? And what reaction, if any, you've had from people who knew him and from Pierre Berger?
Je n'ai pas tout entendu la deuxième partie, ça résonne beaucoup en fait.
Pourquoi cette période-là?
Oui, ça j'ai entendu.
C'est la deuxième partie.
Le micro, le micro.
Non, j'essaie de traduire la question de madame. Pourquoi cette période-là?
So why did you focus on the darker period in Yves Saint Laurent's life? And did you get reactions from people who knew Yves Saint Laurent? Why did you choose this very dark period? I chose that period because the first thing we thought about with Thomas when we had to write the film was how, in the space of 2 hours, now 2.5 hours, we could deal with the whole life of somebody. So I felt it was necessary to focus on a shorter period, and we felt that that decade was the most rich, interesting time in terms of fashion. We're talking about a fashion designer, after all, and also in terms of his life. During this decade, you have a bit of everything. Yves Saint Laurent is still quite a young man, and at the end of the decade, everything has been said, everything has been done. As to the reactions of people, no one has seen the film. This morning was the very first screening, so we'll see what these people's reaction is. Good morning, Jacques de Bonello, Radio Notre-Dame. I'd like to say thank you for this film. It's a very important, powerful film, a very homogeneous, happy discussion, and thank you very much indeed for having brought in Mrs. Dominique Sonda and others. I was fortunate to be able to interview Yves Saint Laurent a few years ago. How did you work on the film? Because you have the film, and then it's partly a documentary, too. I really liked the reaction of one of our co-producers, Olivier Perche. When he saw the film, when it was being made, he said the film goes from a documentary to an opera. And I thought that was a very fair comment. We liked what he said very much. One of the things we wanted to do with Thomas very early on was to show the work that was done by Yves Saint Laurent. That is why you have talked about the film being a documentary. We wanted the seamstresses, who are real seamstresses, to appear in the film. We're talking about haute couture, things that are made by hand. And we therefore felt it was interesting and moving to film the work, the hands, the rigorous work, so that the film would look a bit like a document. And then gradually the film works towards fiction and cinema. But the coexistence of these two dimensions we felt was quite important.
Bonjour, Thomas Adamson,
an American agency. I have a question to get some further clarification. There are two films on Yves Saint Laurent. One was authorized by Pierre Berger, and then yours was not. What do you find so scandalous in the film? Why did Pierre Berger not want to authorize it? Yet you are here in Cannes, and American producers just bought your film. Do you feel that you're very proud about the film now that it's met with such success? Yes, of course, I'm very proud in terms of this authorization you've referred to. I, the producers, we all wanted to make the kind of film we wanted to make. We wanted to feel free. Sometimes, to be free, you have to do things according to your own desires. We're very proud of the result. And the film has become what we really wanted it to be. Pierre Berger in no way intended to forbid anything. Do you think he'll see the film? The project which we began with Bertrand predates the next film. It was just circumstance, it was just chance that Jalil Esbert came up with a project on the same topic. Jalil obtained the firm support of Pierre Berger, who then, in various ways, and very publicly, in fact, that's why I'm saying this, conveyed his opposition to film, and we never wanted the film to go against Pierre Berger. We intended from the very outset just to make a film on Yves Saint Laurent. Bertrand has said something very right in a preceding interview. The second film was made, and that freed us of the constraints of a traditional biopic. We could delve deeper into the real truth, which is what he wanted to portray.
Ça marche. Bonjour, Olivier du MacCinema.fr.
I have a question on the time frame. We go from Yves Saint Laurent in the 60s and 70s, and then see the much older Yves Saint Laurent. I'd like to know whether this ranges from the 80s to the year 2000. You see him going through a magazine that dates from 1988. So what about the chronology in the film? Also, he talks about Paul Gaultier, and I believe that Jean-Paul Gaultier, even if Yves Saint Laurent had already created many things, I wanted to know what the actual timeline was, because things are a bit vague. We go back and forwards. We suddenly jump from his young age to a time when he's much older. Of course, I could refer to 1989. There are little economic details on the stock market. And then, of course, Helmut maybe looked older than Yves in 1989, so that didn't really bother me. It blurred time. I think it helps, actually. It enables the film to show that there is no precise link with time, but there are some precise dates. The costumes, the dresses, the people who come to see him, Jean-Paul Gaultier. We started with 89, and then time becomes a bit more hazy, and I believe that helps the film, in fact, to dilute time, so to speak.
Des problèmes de micro, voilà, ça va mieux. Oui, je voudrais demander aux comédiens comment
I'd like to ask the actors how they dealt with these characters, which are icons. We know them so well. How did they manage to portray these characters? No doubt guidance was given by Bertrand, Bonello, but how did they go about their work? Well, I think basically you have to look things up, read documents. I tried to learn as much as I could about Yves, his work, his family and friends, and then I decided to sort of forget it, assimilate it, and stand back to be totally free. The idea is to go ever further, to transcend certain limits by drawing inspiration from the documents and the background work. The idea was not to become Yves Saint Laurent, but to portray him in a correct, in a right, fair way. Bertrand, at the outset, he said, what interests me is to film you, to film Gaspard. So there was part of me in Yves. The idea was not simply to copy, become Yves. That was a trap, a danger we wanted to avoid. Bertrand, as a director, well, for me, Bertrand, above all, gave me support. It's as though he sort of held my hand and we launched into this adventure together. Nothing is set in concrete in Bertrand's work. Sometimes we started a sequence and it ended up going in the opposite direction from what we had anticipated. I think his work is very organic. It can't be described in precise words. What's decisive in his work is the emotion, the nascent emotion, and the grace between the actors.
C'est très très beau ce qu'il vient de dire, je crois.
What you've just said is very beautiful indeed.
Mon rôle était surtout
My role consisted in observing Gaspard, Saint Laurent, and supporting him. Then, of course, we had background material which we used. We imagined many things with Bertrand, with Gaspard, but I basically watched Gaspard played the part, build up the character of Saint Laurent, and we talked about this with Bertrand. We've known each other, of course, for quite some time, and it's something we didn't really need to work on. I watched him. We've known each other for so very long. We didn't need to actually work on things per se. Even when we tried things out, there was almost a form of sensuality between the two of us because we'd known each other very intimately for a long time. It was a question of trust also. He'd just done a biopic. He'd already worked with Bertrand several years ago. That's an old trauma. It's something that's very important. The film starts in 1967. Pierre and Yves have already been together for several years. You don't see the time they met, the birth of this love story. When you see Pierre and Yves on the screen, you can already see that they're together. When we tried things out, we didn't want to see whether one or the other knew how to act the part. We wanted to see how things would work out on the screen. And it was instant. Things worked out from the very beginning. So right at the beginning of the film, you can sense that the people have known each other for a long time, that they already love each other. You don't even need to explain it. Leah and Amira, you had this background material. So how did you go about the character? Mrs. Munoz is someone who worked in a very rigorous way. She watches over people with great kindness. She has an absolute love of detail and work well done. She's a wonderful craftswoman. She's very moving as a woman. She was the companion and friend of Yves Saint Laurent ever since he worked for Dior. They'd known each other for so very long. They actually met when they were very young. And I think Bertrand works a bit like a painter, an artist. Everything is nuanced, like with an artist. And then we just let ourselves go and act. Well, I was a little touch of color. The character had to be a very light character. I didn't particularly want to imitate or copy Loulou de la Falaise, but she accompanies Saint Laurent and helps him to deploy his talent. And Aymeline, what about you, this initial experience? What wasn't easy for me is the fact that Betty is very discreet. We don't have much backup material. It's a bit like for Amira. So I focus on the fact that she was the archetype of the modern woman. And I thought about my status as a woman today and wondered about what her status would have been at the time. And that was the starting point of my work. The text is so very beautiful. The actors can simply bow to the words. The text was so very beautiful for us that that is a wonderful thing to have. It's a form of support.
Bonjour, Hugues Daillet,
Hugues Daillet, Belgian TV.
Bonjour, Jérémie. Bonjour, Jérémie.
Good morning, Jérémie. I have a question for Bertrand and also for the actors. Not for me. Yes, but we're only allowed to ask one question. You talked about filming work. Filming the workshop, the seamstresses at work. You don't see Yves Saint Laurent at work much. You see him fall in love with Jacques de Bacher. You see him getting totally lost in a sense. You insist, of course, much more. Okay, you do see the fashion shows, but you insist more on his solitude than on his collective work in the studio. A question for the actors as well. Contrary to you, I'm a cinema critic. I did see the other film, and Pierre Renier said to me that his key for understanding Saint Laurent consisted in working on his very special voice. What about the voice of the character, therefore? Pierre Berger is still here. What about the voice, the intonation, the behaviors? Were they an open sesame when it came to identifying with the characters? I'll answer first. You said you don't see Yves working much, but you see him drawing. You see him drawing quite a lot in the film, and that's the very basis of his work. And then the drawings go to the workshop, and the first time you see Yves in '67, he's touching the cloth, the textiles. So I wanted to have a very long sequence showing how the clothes were actually being made. I don't agree entirely with you. I do think you see him creating, you see him at work, particularly when it comes to drawing. Drawing was the very basis, the starting point for him. And now I'll hand over to the actors. I think what's really interesting in his work and what really attracted me to the film was the fact that at a given point in time you go beyond just a biopic. It's more than a biopic. It's an odyssey in the head of a creator. It's a film about the creative process. And in my view, the life of an artist has never been so ably rendered together with the process of creation. And I think that's quite magical in this film. Then in terms of his voice, this was one of the last points, perhaps, that I inserted in my acting. Of course, it's very important. I knew that there would be comparisons, inevitably, with Yves' real voice and what Pierre Ninet had done, and I didn't know what Pierre Ninet was going to do at all. So I really wondered hard about this, and I turned up on the set on the very first day without knowing what I was really going to do with the voice. I decided to follow my instinct, and things came quite naturally. The first days of shooting, maybe I was a bit hesitant, and then things came quite naturally. We hardly discussed the matter with Bertrand. What did you say to me? You kept saying the same thing to me. Yves' voice is fragile. I didn't want this fragility to look like weakness or aging. For me, this was not the starting point when I got to work on the character. For me, it's quite the opposite. It was indeed the starting point. I listen very carefully to voices. I'm very interested in this kind of work, adopting the voice of a character. That helps me better to understand that character, in fact. Yves, do you remember this afternoon? That's how I tried to imitate the voice. For me, this was very important. We're less familiar with Pierre Berger's voice, perhaps, so for my acting, it was important. I could stop being myself and totally identify with the life of somebody else. But everything was done. Gaspard, of course, had to draw as close as possible to this well-known voice. I think actors need something, a sort of a cue that enables them to really assimilate the character. Also, the body was important. I tried to lose weight. My idea was to turn up on the set with a body that was no longer mine. And I think that was very important when it came to totally identifying with the character.
Volga TV, Russian television. It's a famous fact. The big success of Yves Saint Laurent is his Russian collection. How do you show in your film? And did you learn Russian cultural, Russian tradition shooting your film?
Ce que je connaissais avant de
la culture russe.
I think that the Russian impact on the collection comes from the influence of Russian culture and Oriental culture in general. People talk about Russian culture, but it's broader than that. And I think it was the painters who really influenced Yves Saint Laurent, Oriental painters, and that helped him to do this collection. I was familiar with the painters that he drew inspiration from, but I think that the inspiration really came from the painters for him. Thank you very much for this gift that is the best possible rendering of Yves Saint Laurent, the rendering of his very soul. And I want to thank you for that. I would like to thank Mr. Bonello for the very sophisticated and stunningly beautiful film. I'd like to ask Mr. Ulliel if it was a problem for you to be so naked physically and morally. Particularly, there were some very explicit scenes. And also, what about the homosexuality of Yves Saint Laurent? How did you sense that? How did you live that kind of thing? An actor discovers his limits every time he has a new film to shoot, and you try to push back the limits and go even farther each time. So yes, I did feel quite naked, but not necessarily physically naked. It was other points that upset me more. The depression, the very dark side. Now, when you have the kissing scene, that is really part of my work. It doesn't link up in any way with my own personal life. So no, it wasn't a very complicated thing to do. With Louis Garrel, well, I didn't know him as well as Jérémie before the shooting of the film. It was quite surprising. There is this incredible grace which arose between us as of the first scene, and it was very important for me. When shooting the film, we had 2 or 3 weeks of shooting inside where the costumes, the dresses were being made, and in the scenes with de Bacher, the film acquires a new dimension. It acquires wings, so to speak. Bertrand talked about this grace between Yves and de Bacher, which in fact also changed certain scenes, the length of certain scenes, and even the way certain sequences were shot. The kissing was not actually in the screenplay. Bonello, Brazil Post. I'd like to know a bit more about Helmut Berger's participation in the film. Why did you choose him? And how was it to shoot with him? Why? I don't even know why. When we started working with Thomas, we quickly drew the various parts. There were 3 parts, and in the 3rd part, we thought that we needed to have a new actor, and the name Helmut occurred to us right away. We took a lot of time watching films. We used VHS, we watched Les Damnés time and again, and whence the idea of Helmut. It wasn't a casting idea, it sprang from the screenplay. It occurred to us very early on, this idea that the voice would remain the same, but the body would totally change. And it appeared obvious that there was only one person who could show this, embody it, without making things look artificial. Helmut Berger was the obvious choice. And then what about the actual shooting? The shooting went fine. Prior to that, it was a bit more difficult. But I think when he turned up on the set and he saw that there was a camera, 35 millimeters, a lot of lighting, that things were very sophisticated, did that remind him of very happy memories? I don't know, but he certainly then really became a part of the film. Yves Saint Laurent in the 90s looked exactly like Helmut Berger. It's not just a fabulous idea in terms of screenplay, it's very close to the real situation.
From Spanish media called Fila 7, I would to ask Bertrand, the movie is about duality. How do you work it with the actor and the and the writer, this duality between shadows and light, the beauty and the monsters? I think is one of the subjects of the movie. Thank you.
I
would like to say that the answer is in your question. One of the first words we used was contrast when we were writing the film. We felt that the film had to be based largely on contrast, that there shouldn't be a sort of linear evolution. Often a night scene would be followed by a day scene, or vice versa. A scene depicting creativity would be followed by a slightly more morbid scene. So we thought that on the basis of contrast, we could build up this tension we were looking for. That's why I say the answer to your question is in your question itself. This is something that obviously I thought about throughout the writing, the shooting, even the editing. We always try to create this contrast, bring together opposites to create this sort of relief, and that depicts the soul of the person.
Amira from the Telegraph newspaper of India. Maybe I can direct my question to the ladies on the panel. And it's basically a very simple question, but also there is a bit of a mystery. What is it about France? It's a question not just about Yves Saint Laurent, but all the other designers. People make clothes and cut clothes all over the world. But what is it about France that this country is able to make the best clothes, the most stylish clothes, the most beautiful clothes, and the most expensive clothes in the world?
I will just sum it up by saying that I think, in a way, the French love good taste and don't like too much excess. So things have to be, there's a wonderful word in French that's rather difficult to find in English, but ça veut dire la justesse. La justesse. And I think the French have that. And of course, there's all this tradition of years of history of art, and Versailles and Louis XIV. And, I think in a way, Yves Saint Laurent really tried to create himself as an emperor as well, like a sort of a court surrounded by beauty and luxury, and always elevating his idea of luxury, going from Manet, Goya, from the first vases that he bought, the antiquities. And I think that's something that's very inherent in French culture. The French are aesthetes. I don't know if that does it. They'll always be aesthetes. Even, any regime, there'll always be aesthetes.
I think she's quite right. It's true that we're very demanding in terms of good taste. We always are keen to respect the finest details of things, and we want these details to be absolutely pure and simple. And what we tend to say, well, if this isn't quite right, it's better just to remove it. Less is more. Like in French cinema, less is more.
Bertrand,
the beauty of women, the beauty of the dresses, the beauty of the images. You use 35 millimeters in the film. Why? It's something that I wanted absolutely to do. It's not because I felt 35 millimeters is good and digital isn't. It's just that the two are totally different. So long as we still have the choice, I think it's good to use 35 millimeters. Without going into the more technical details, 35 millimeters is softer. The colors, the textures are softer. And I couldn't imagine making a film on Yves Saint Laurent in a digital universe. I'd like to say that it doesn't cost much more either. That is a misconception to think it's more costly. Unfortunately, the question could not be heard. There was no microphone.
Saint Laurent filmait tous ses défilés en 35 mm.
Saint Laurent shot all his fashion shows in 35 millimeters. Martin Guilaudeau, Media Film, Montreal. I have a question for Bertrand Bonello. There have been polemics concerning Berger and his approval of your film. Your film, like many biographical films, are wonderful. Who does the private life of a very public person belong to? That, I think, is quite important. It might even refer to your president. Did you wonder about this? Did you ever think to yourself, is it up to me to tell the tale of the private life of somebody else? I don't say anything in the film that isn't known to the public. We don't reveal any secrets. We're not revealing anything that has so far been unknown. So I felt quite free in that respect. And everything is just a viewpoint, a vision, a choice. The more things are personal, the better. I don't venture to say that this is the absolute truth. It becomes a fiction, but based on real facts. So I never really wondered about what was right, what was wrong, what was good, what was evil, certain moral rights. I don't think that applies to this film at all. If you take a bottle and you ask 3 people to paint it, the 3 people will paint the bottle in different ways, and that's so much the better. Nicole Gabriel, Jeune Cinéma. I have a comment for Bertrand Bonello. I interpret your film as a film on a period that is now bygone. I also think it's a sort of tribute to Visconti and perhaps Daniel Schmidt as well. I think that the voices are absolutely right, together with all the references to music, to Callas and so on. All this work on the voices is very right indeed. It's absolutely the way things should be. It's a homage 2 times past. Yes, many things belong to Yves' universe. Callas, Maria Callas, he was crazy about her. In any event, this is something that moves me greatly. Decadence, but in the etymological sense of the words. That is something which is drawing to an end and cannot be born again. Over and beyond the character of Yves, the film depicts a time, an era that is drawing to a close. And that entails the use of the details I show in the film, these aesthetics, the images, the references. I felt that was important to depict in the film.
Giovanna Grassi, Corriere della Sera.
Giovanna Grassi, Corriere della Sera. I would like to know what the title of the Italian film you see is. We wondered with other colleagues what this film was, and we couldn't figure it out when we were watching your film. You leave the film with the certainty that Yves Saint Laurent was looking for something he never found, and he was looking throughout his life. In your opinion, in your view, what was he actually looking for? To answer your first question, I think you're talking about Visconti's film, Les Damnés, The Damned People. I think it was another Italian film.
C'est un film de Ophuls qui s'appelle Madame 2.
It's called Madame 2. As to your second question, I have the impression that all people who create are eternally unsatisfied. They're looking for something they can't find, and that's why they continue to work. What was he actually looking for? The absolute, certain traits, certain colors, certain feelings and sensations. And then, as soon as he had reached a given point, he felt dissatisfied. He felt he needed to go further. And that's very important, otherwise you just stop. And also, in the specific instance of Yves Saint Laurent, like Gaspard, these are people who talked about minor arts for singing, lighting and music. He then referred to the major arts in the case of other artists who he particularly respected, like painters. It's a film which is all about creation. We felt it was very difficult to depict creation. However, it's hard to define what he was actually looking for. So we built the film not thinking so much about what he was looking for, but how much it cost him. Many biopics and many films inspired by well-known people are based on where they come from. We decided to focus the film on how much this all costed the main character. Actors know how hard it is to act in a movie. We know how much it costs to make a movie too. So the idea of the film was to focus on how much this cost him in personal terms, as opposed to what he was actually looking for. I have a question for Gaspard Ulliel.
À l'issue de ce film, je voulais savoir de quoi étiez-vous le plus fier?
What are you most proud of in this film? It's a difficult question to answer. I never really thought about it personally. What am I most proud of? Well, to have managed, to have succeeded, to be here today, that's a wonderful reward. Quite frankly, I don't know what to say. I'm very proud. Well, it was an experience that might have caused me quite a lot of fear and anxiety. I was quite afraid at a given point in time. But I had great trust in the screenplay because I knew we could really count on that. I discovered the screenplay and I thought to myself, well, it's fabulous, it's stunning. But that meant that a lot was expected of us, and that boosted my anxiety. I wondered whether during the shooting we'd be able to add anything to the screenplay, whether we'd be able to go beyond the screenplay, which is the whole point of acting. I have tremendous trust in Bertrand as well. So what I'm really proud of is to have succeeded with this venture, which wasn't easy at the outset, given the fact that I was really quite fearful at the beginning. Who amongst you actually knew Yves Saint Laurent? What did you know about him? What did you know about your characters? A question to Gaspard Ulliel. Did you practice drawing to be able to draw like Yves Saint Laurent? No, I wouldn't say I didn't practice at all. Initially, there was supposed to be a stand-in. I don't know how things came about. Ah, yes, you said, I'd like to try. And Bertrand quickly said, well, let's try it. And he saw that it worked. Then he did some slightly underhand things. There were some days when we were running a bit late, things weren't quite right in Marrakesh, and we had quickly to shoot certain scenes. And he just gave me the examples of the drawings 5 minutes before we had to shoot the scene. But I've always loved drawing. I've always drawn since I was a child, in fact. So it was actually quite easy for me to do those scenes. Adeline Desson, you didn't get the approval of Pierre Berger. Did Yves Saint Laurent, the company, provide the drawings, the sketches, particularly for the last fashion show, or did you have to recreate everything yourselves? We had access to absolutely nothing, nothing at all, not even a shirt. So everything you saw in the film had to be recreated. There were a lot of dresses from the collection, Liberation 40. We rented these costumes from a collector, so they are period pieces, but all the dresses you see, particularly in the final scene, had to be recreated. We built a real studio with all the seamstresses. You could see them going about their work. A tremendous amount of work was done by all the members of the crew. The person in charge of the costumes and the set, Anaïs and others did some fabulous work. It was a tremendous investment in terms of time and effort, but it was passionately interesting. We had to do a lot of research in order to stay very close to reality. There were 2 fashion shows which we show in the film, even the one with the costumes which look as though they come from the 40s. We had to do a lot of work to find the fabrics. We went to Italy, the south of France, to find these fabrics for the costumes, and that's why you see these textures which are so unique. We tried to be as faithful as possible to Yves Saint Laurent. We recreated everything to faithfully follow what the fashion designer had done. Thank you very much.